Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss productivity tactics that work for neurodivergent individuals.
Every episode, we interview guests with lived experience of neurodiversity who also have a solid productivity and habit game, and pass the learnings on to you, our wise and benevolent audience.
We're your hosts, Jeremy and Joey.
I'm Joey, and I coach creatives to get moving on their most ambitious projects through the power of solid habits and strong focus. I'm also a perpetual student of psychology and perpetually on a quest to a one-armed chin-up.
And I'm Jeremy, a neurospicy software developer turned startup founder, building the Focus Bear app to help people with ADHD and autism thrive at work. My cool party trick is leaving parties early so I can get to sleep in time for my 2-hour-long morning routine. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a focus enhancement app for ADHDers. That's adults with both combined autism and ADHD. I'm Jeremy, I'm an ADHDer myself. I'm the founder of Focus Bear and also one of the hosts of this podcast. I built Focus Bear for myself originally because I was constantly getting distracted by my phone and my laptop. I wanted a way to tame my ADHD monkey mind so I'd stop going down rabbit holes and actually get work done, but also get off my computer and my phone in the evening so I'd be able to sleep properly. It's working perfectly for me and it's helping a lot of ADHDs as well. I'd love for you to try it. It's available for Mac, Windows, iOS and Android, and it leverages most of the productivity strategies we talk about on the podcast. You can jump onto focusbear.io or just Google Focus Bear and try it out. Let me know what you think. Welcome to episode 111 of the Focus and Chill podcast. I'm joined by Yush Sztalkoper today. Yush is a neurodivergent entrepreneur, coach, and parent of a twice exceptional son. Diagnosed with ADHD combined type as an adult, Yush offers a holistic perspective on neurodivergent thriving by integrating personal experience and her parenting journey. Her work is based on the positive intelligence method, which focuses on reshaping mental patterns that contribute to self-doubt, burnout, and overwhelm, ultimately fostering clarity, confidence, and sustainable productivity. Yush aims to share her lived experience and mindset shifts, providing insights on creating systems that align with neurodivergent brains. Welcome to the show, Yush.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really great to have you. So keen to hear about your own journey with discovering that you weren't neurotypical.
Yes. So my journey started with my son. When he was around 4.5, we started noticing some challenges that were unlike peers his age and that were very challenging, unlike anything I think first-time parents expect. And in my gut, I knew there was something deeper going on. And so that's how my journey started. I started to try to understand what was going on with him, speaking to a lot of different specialists and experts. And, that was almost over 4 years ago. And that learning journey and experience really became sort of a reflection into understanding my own brain. But seeing it from a child's perspective, I think is especially meaningful because there hasn't been much that has shaped him into who he is yet. There's a lot of nature and, not a ton of nurture. So trying to understand what's going on that's already a part of him and what is being shaped by his environment. It was just really eye-opening. And when I got my diagnosis about a year ago, it really wasn't a shock. I had suspicions that I was most likely neurodivergent myself. So my son is twice exceptional. He's incredibly bright, but he does have some learning differences. And so seeing that duality and just seeing the complexity of how it shows up in an individual, I think is something that was really confusing in the beginning. But once I started to sort of uncover so many of these different things and discovering and learning and peeling back layers and layers, we're in a much better place and he's thriving now because we've figured out how to support him in a way that he needs support. That's my journey. And I take a very strength-based approach in parenting my son. And so I take that approach for myself as well in understanding what support system do I need in order to thrive. And I'm in my early 40s. I'm not going to give away my age, but I'm in my early 40s and this has been my whole life that I've been a certain way and I never really questioned it. I just kind of accepted that I had my struggles and I was who I was. But getting my diagnosis has completely changed everything for me for the better. Obviously, the self-awareness, the sense making, and now understanding where I need support and not feel guilty about it or ashamed about it, I think has been really meaningful for me.
It sounds like you have been a really nurturing force in your son's life. I imagine when you said there's been little nurture, you meant little environmental impacts from people outside the family. But
Yes.
great that.
Well, and I think as a parent, the nurturing piece comes naturally. But when you have a neurodivergent child, it's next level. There are no parenting books, as you know, or you may have heard, but when you have a neurodivergent child, there's even less resources out there. So what you end up having to do is go with your gut and essentially rely on thinking about how do you build that deep connection with your child and think about parenting from a place of love and understanding versus expectations, which I think oftentimes there are a lot of external expectations that shape how we support individuals, children, others. And I think this really forces us to kind of look deeper within to see what really resonates with us.
Yeah, it's good for me to hear because I'm expecting a child soon, and I expect they may be twice exceptional in some way. And dealing with those expectations seems really key because I know it's very common to live vicariously through children, and that would be hard, I guess, if they're not heading in the direction that you expect them to go.
Yes. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
It is absolutely a joy being a parent. And, I would say early in this journey, when we started to face the challenges, it was really hard. And I was very much taking the victim mentality. Why is this happening to me? Other people's children aren't going through the challenges that we're going through, things like that. But now I am so aware of the fact that he is my gift. He is a blessing, that everything that is who he is has forced me to see myself in a different way so that I can finally get the support that I've never had. And my parents, I don't blame them. They did the best they could with what they had. I'm Chinese. We immigrated here when I was 7. In the Asian culture, we don't talk about differences a lot. We, as a culture, we are told to overcome those differences and fit in and belong. And then with the immigrant background, that's even more of a priority. And I just kind of had to mask pretty much my whole life. I had to learn to adapt. I had to learn to essentially figure things out and overcome those challenges and do my best to be like everybody else. And I think what our children teach us is the greatest lesson. And that's why I see them as gifts is when you become a parent, you get this reflection of yourself in a way that you would never get anywhere else. And you start to see their struggles in in yourself, and you start to question, wow, I do that. But I never questioned why I did that. I just thought, oh, this is something I have to overcome. And get ready, Jeremy. It's going to be, and you're obviously far ahead of this journey than me. You already know your profile and your neurodivergent needs. And I only realized that after I had children. So I would say that you're definitely better prepared than I am. I'm happy to always be a resource to you, obviously. I have 2 boys, so definitely can say I'm an expert in that department. But because my son has ADHD and his difference, it does present differently. And so I had to try to reconcile, how does it show up in him? And then how does it show up in me? And how are those 2 things very similar, but just looks different? And so that's why there are a lot of studies out there that show that, oh my gosh, boys have this profile with ADHD, and then girls have this profile, and why a lot of girls are underdiagnosed or the signs are missed, because there is a lot more masking going on and it just looks differently. Girls can sit still, boys really can't, who have ADHD. So there are a lot of things like that I've learned in this process.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone could ever be truly ready, but yeah, it sounds like there'll be a lot of discovery ahead. And
Yeah.
It's great that you've had a positive experience going through that process of getting diagnosed and I guess sense making, you said. What are some of the things that make sense now that were challenges in the past that you didn't understand why they were challenges?
Oh my goodness. We could spend the whole podcast talking about this. But I did want to quickly share earlier, I mentioned sort of shifting my perspective. And a lot of it is because I practice this method called positive intelligence, which essentially helps you understand sort of the self-sabotaging negative thoughts or emotions that you experience and shift them into, a different perspective and thinking about if I'm a victim because of the work I've done with positive intelligence. I've shifted that perspective to seeing the opportunities and the gifts that came out of my situation. So I look at things differently. And it's also what has enabled me to actually parent from a strength-based perspective because I focus on the things that we're really good at versus the challenges that we have to overcome. And there are a lot of challenges. So to answer your question, I was a huge pleaser. And the pleaser part has really shaped so much of my life. You're probably familiar with rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's a real thing. And I think it drove a lot of who my identity and the person that I have been the past 40 plus years. And I used to think, oh, I'm just competitive. Oh, I just like to make everybody happy. I like to do these things. So, there's no conflict. And I went through this long journey of trying to figure out, well, why do I do these things? And it wasn't until I got my ADHD diagnosis that I started learning about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. My brain is wired a certain way that makes me do certain things that make my nervous systems feel safe and calm. And by doing that, maybe it's a calm environment in my house. Maybe I learned from an early age that if I did what people wanted me to do, that I would get a smile or I would get a hug or right. So a lot of these things that I think, really kind of shaped who I was. And I became very interested in sociology when I was at university. And it wasn't a coincidence. I've been studying people my whole life. I've been observing because that's my survival skill, the ability to adapt. And, I mentioned earlier, I moved here from China when I was 7. And as you can imagine, being an immigrant at that age, like the amount of adapting you have to do. And fortunately, I have these superpowers, right? I have these skills that are a part of who I am. And yes, the thing that positive intelligence teaches you is that we all have these strengths, but when you overuse that strength, that's when it leads to burnout or it leads to, chronic stress or anxiety and a lot of these other negative emotions because that's not sustainable. And so you have to find the balance. So I can still be a people pleaser. I just need to know where my boundaries are. I need to know where my limits are. I can't people please perpetually because then who am I neglecting? Me. And so that's the other part of it, the masking, right? I worked in corporate for 20 years and I didn't realize until I got my ADHD diagnosis that I should not actually wear with a badge of honor the fact that I was constantly overcoming challenges. I just thought, well, this is what everybody's experience is like. And, they might be overcoming different challenges, but somebody is overcoming something. So this is my job. I'm supposed to overcome these challenges. And it's around prioritization. It's around doing tasks that don't interest me, right? It's around time blindness and time compression, like all these things around challenges that are quite common with people with ADHD, the pleaser mentality, being a hyperachiever and an overperformer because you want to make sure that you are making your managers happy and that you're getting that performance bonus and you're getting your reviews and all of that. So and the corporate culture promotes this type of performance-based environment. And so it's just perpetuating, right, these struggles that I have. And I essentially got sort of to a very high leadership position in the corporate world. And I realized that it was because I was questioning so much of, is this really what I was trying to achieve this whole time? And then when I got my diagnosis, it just gave me such clarity around understanding that, this environment actually makes it really hard for me to thrive. And I started to figure out, well, what type of environment do I need? And this is why I became an entrepreneur, because I realized I needed flexibility, I needed autonomy, I needed the chance to do things my way and not have to meet other people's expectations. A lot of the roles I had, I would be that person who would come with these crazy ideas, and everybody's like, okay, Yush, let's just stick with your job and do what is in your job description. But I'm like, no, how about we do, I'm always thinking outside the box and innovatively. As you know, that's a very core part of being neurodivergent. Like, that's what one of our superpowers are. I can say collectively, like across a lot of the different profiles and neurotypes, we all sort of have that ability to think differently. And I think that's a huge strength that I see with neurodivergent individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like there've been major changes then. Did that shift away from corporate to being an entrepreneur happen after your diagnosis, or were you already making that transition beforehand?
No, I got my diagnosis and I left that job like 2 months later. It was something that was already obviously in the works because I have been questioning everything for so long, especially with this mirror journey with my son, that I think when it came, it was kind of the validation that I needed, the confirmation that I needed that, you know what? It's not me. It's the system. And the only way I'm going to get out of this is and help myself is by getting out of it. That major mindset shift that I achieved through my positive intelligence work, which was life-changing. Honestly, just changing the way I looked at my son, the way I looked at myself, and the way I looked at others. Because positive intelligence is grounded in you have your saboteurs, but you have these sages that guide you in thinking, almost your wiser self. And one of them that I use regularly is empathy. And one of the things I discovered was that I have always had empathy for others, but I really didn't have empathy for myself. And getting that diagnosis was huge in shifting my mindset from I needed to fix myself and this deficit mindset to thinking, you know what? I actually have a lot of strengths and superpowers. I'm just in the wrong environment. I'm being underutilized. My superpowers don't get a chance to shine because they didn't hire me for those superpowers, right? And the reality is in any job, like there are so many different things. And I was in a role that my most recent role, I was in a role where I was essentially like playing a sort of a consulting role where there were a lot of different projects that I was juggling. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is literally the worst job somebody with ADHD could have. Is like juggling like 20 different projects, like context switching and like all the little, oh gosh, don't even get me there. It just like gives me like, I get stressed out just thinking about it now. And also because those projects are not necessarily on, there were quite a few that I really enjoyed, but they weren't all consistently ones that I loved. And what I discovered about my son and myself is that, and by the way, I really don't like the ADHD descriptor because I'm like, it's not a deficit. It's not an attention deficit because when we find topics or things that we're interested in, that hyperfocus kicks in. And so I think there needs to be a reframe in how we think about it because I realized that my son and I, when we find things that we're interested in, you can't stop us. Like that's actually what the problem becomes. You can't stop the focus and you have to consciously break off that focus so that you can kind of move on. And I just started to see myself in a different light and I realized I need a different support system. And at that time, I didn't know I was going to become an entrepreneur. I just knew that I could not be in that corporate environment anymore. And I reflected back in 20 years of working in that space and and there were definitely parts of my corporate journey where I was thriving in certain roles. And I tried to think back as to, well, why were those roles different? And it was always, I was doing something that was really interesting for me, that I had autonomy. I did not have a manager that was micromanaging me, that gave me freedom to be creative, to think outside the box, and to do all these things that, where I felt like I could really be myself. And so, there were parts of it that did enable me to thrive. But I think as you kind of go further up in the leadership chain, that those opportunities, I think, to be yourself as a neurodivergent individual becomes harder.
Interesting. So I would have thought the higher up you go, the less micromanagement you'd have. But
But the micromanagement is, I think that's an interesting way to think about it, because there is a certain level of micromanagement, but then you have all these unspoken expectations around you as a leader, how you're supposed to behave, act, do, communicate, lead. And I think there are and I think that's where it really is. Because for me, everything comes back to expectations. We talked about this even being a parent, right? It's those expectations. Who creates those expectations? Those expectations typically tend to be external. And one of the things that I've discovered in this journey, seeing my own neurodivergence, is I've changed the expectation. I've essentially stopped. I wouldn't say I stopped caring. I would say I put less emphasis on those external expectations. And now I focus on what my internal expectations are for myself, for my child. And that's the space that I start from. Because the reality is, we're talking about a system that isn't built for people like us. And there's still a lot of stigma out there. In the US where I live, lots of stigmas. People don't like labels, and being different is not necessarily anything that anybody is really raising their hands to shout that they're shouting from the rooftops. And so which is why I think it's so important for me to ensure that my voice is being shared, because I have quite a unique blend, being immigrant, Asian, woman, parent who's neurodivergent. There aren't a lot of voices who are representing this type of profile. And I just think that we need to continue to have these conversations so that we can share what this experience looks like and how we're all different. It can show up in anybody. And so the more that people can see, oh, wow, she doesn't look neurodivergent. Well, what does neurodivergence look like? So I think it's breaking sort of a lot of those stereotypes and stigmas around what people just don't understand. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, probably in corporate, there'd be a lot of people who actually are like us that feel too afraid to speak up about some of the expectations that don't make sense, and some of the ways things are structured that are working counter to the strengths that we could bring. Because it seems like a massive shame that you had all these great ideas about how things could be done differently, and you were asked to go back into your pigeonhole. That's such a waste at a time where innovation is needed even more.
Yes. And when you're in a certain role that maybe isn't meant to be somebody who is thinking outside the box, because of expectations, those ideas don't really go anywhere. But if I was in a role that was like chief innovation officer, they would probably listen to me, right? But I think that's the value I brought. Was I was in a unique role where I helped to think differently about how we could do things, and it was a strategic role. So you would think that was something that would be really valuable. But the reality is, a lot of these corporate systems that these organizations are operating within are old school, and the leadership teams like how things have been done for years and years and years. And people don't love change management, right? People don't like being pushed out of their comfort zone. They don't want to embrace something that they're not familiar with. And I think about this neurodiversity movement as something very similar to this and like archaic corporate system, is that we have to show people why it's necessary to shift the way we think about neurodivergence, individuals, and neurodiversity, and all of these things. And that's why I take a very strength-based approach in my work and how I parent and how I have conversations with everybody, because that shows people the possibilities. That shows people that, hey, we don't need to just talk about negatives all the time. We can talk about the positives. And the reality is there's so much possibility and there's so much potential. I look at my son, he's 8.5, and I see tremendous potential. I can see that he will be a change maker one day. He has that innovative mindset. He already wants to be an entrepreneur. I think he sees me being an entrepreneur and he's very encouraged by it. But the reality is, if we aren't supporting neurodivergent brains in a way that they can thrive and reach their potential, we're doing a huge disservice to our collective future. And so that's how I look at my child. And then I realized that this wasn't just about me and him. This is about all of us. This is about everybody's future, because some of the greatest minds, innovative minds, the minds that have built and created and designed and shaped, they're neurodivergent. And they may or may not know it back then, but now we're starting to understand. And so I think that's kind of how I see the importance of my job. I'm like, now I know what my purpose is, to make sure that my son has a future where he is not only seen for who he is, but he's valued for the contributions that he brings, and that he's celebrated for his differences. Because I already see great leadership skills in him. I see so much potential. And I'm like, my job is just to make sure that potential is sustained and that he gets the support system he needs. Because early on, he was defined by his behaviors, his struggles, his challenges. And as a mother, it was heartbreaking to see him struggle in that way and to see people judge him and misunderstand him. And it was just not something that I'm like, I have to turn this around. And that's been my mission ever since. And it's obviously now grown into, wow, I can actually help other people as well who is struggling, because just by sharing my journey, just by sharing with other strategies that I've tried and tested that work, it's a game changer. It really is. And if I can help somebody else who is going through this experience and help them get the tools and resources and support earlier and struggle less than I did, I'm happy to do this work. I'm happy to go out there and share my story and all of that. So, which sounds very similar to what you're doing as well. And I think a lot of us feel the same way, having lived this experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful what you're doing. Could you tell the audience a bit more about what you're doing with your business now?
Yes, I've done extensive research in the past year. I started a nonprofit this past year, just helping to support families in my community who have twice exceptional children. Because the reality is the 2E profile is very misunderstood because a lot of people aren't familiar with it. But the duality creates complications around identifying, because you're smart enough to mask. And so oftentimes it's like, well, this kid is really smart, but I don't know why he is choosing to behave this way. So I hear that a lot, and it's misunderstood that it's a choice. That child is choosing to behave a certain way. They're choosing not to listen. They're choosing to be dysregulated. And I'm like, no, that is so unfair to the child. And that is not true. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to share my story. And if it helped any other parents in my town, then I would gladly help. I have a corporate events background, so it's in my blood to organize gatherings. And so I just went to our local library and started putting together these monthly sessions. In the beginning, I was thinking, I'm just a parent. The RSD is still there that I was working on. Like, I don't want people to say, she's just a parent. What does she know? And so I would bring in experts that I had worked with in the past 3 years, who had been a core part of our growth journey. And I would work with them to bring them in and have them essentially be available as a resource to parents who came to my sessions, so that these parents felt seen and heard and supported, right? Because the reality is all of our journeys are unique. And my experience could be very different from somebody else's experience. So I wanted to make sure that any parent who came to these sessions felt like their specific and unique situation was being addressed and that we honor their story and their journey. And so I did this for like 5 sessions, and a lot of people were coming, and parents were just literally, they said it was life-changing being
Mm.
in that space because they felt less alone. They
Mm.
felt less isolated. And that was my emotion and feeling when I was navigating this. I was doing it all by myself. I didn't have a support system. I had my online support groups of 2E parents that I learned so much from. Thank goodness for those Facebook groups. And what I found valuable was each parent's unique stories. And I would extrapolate from, pieces from this family and this family and this family. And I kind of pieced together what I needed. And so I essentially wanted to recreate that experience for my parents in my town in person. Because I have a corporate events background, I understand the value of human connections. I understand the science behind it. I understand, how we as human beings are meant to connect with each other. And especially when you have such a profound shared experience, it's just so meaningful and just much stronger and deeper when you're doing this in person. So I did that. And now it's 1 year in. I'm still hosting those sessions monthly. But what I realized from that, and this is where Neuros Spark Plus grew out of, was that I wasn't able to scale that work. And I also wasn't able to reach everybody, because the reality is, especially I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stigma around labels and being different. I realized some people weren't ready to be in a public facing space and either self-identify or acknowledge that they have challenges that they need to work on. And so I wanted to create services that would support individuals or parents who are navigating this journey who did not want to be part of a community and did not want to, or wasn't ready to be part of the group yet. And then I also was thinking about scalability, and from a strategic perspective, what's a better way to scale than to work with organizations, right? Who have individuals who already work in their workplace who need that same level of support. And I'm specifically thinking about 2 individuals who are high performing and who are masking. And that's what leads to burnout. I lived that firsthand. And so reflecting back on my 20 years of experience working in the corporate environment, I realized I know exactly what it takes to build a neuro-inclusive culture within those organizations. And, with my strategic sort of consulting background, it was kind of a no-brainer. I'm like, okay, I can help organizations as well. And the reality is, I take a very holistic approach to supporting my son, because I think the thing that we all should acknowledge is that we're complex. And so there isn't a simple solution. There is a complex support system that we all need. And I always say my son gets a 360-degree support system because that's what he needs. And how are we able to give others that type of support system? And so I think about that a lot. I also think about the fact that being a neurodivergent individual, you're neurodivergent your whole life, in the full life cycle. You're not just neurodivergent at school. You're not just neurodivergent at work. You're not just neurodivergent as a parent. And I've noticed that there's a lot of sort of siloed support systems, like something that just supports kids when they're in their early childhood or in college or at work. And what about that holistic support system of looking at us as a whole person from beginning to end? And so that's kind of how I see myself, as a generalist who I can come in and help anybody who is navigating any neurodivergent journeys along the full spectrum of their lives. And I'm not your traditional expert. I don't claim to know how to support you in all of these areas, but what I can do is help people navigate their journeys and help them think about, how do we shift your mindset so that you start to believe in yourself, you start to love yourself, and you start to see these strengths, because self-advocacy is core to this work. I want to help people learn how to self-advocate so that, in these corporate environments, we don't have to rely on leaders to think about, well, how do I support this individual? Because it has to be a two-way dialogue, because the individuals who need the support need to be able to articulate and have a voice in shaping these neuro-inclusive cultures. And the leaders really need to listen and be able to understand, like, what does that look like and how do we co-create these experiences?
Yeah, that sounds really important. And in terms of how you make that scale, is it an e-learning course, or how do you go about doing it in a way that you can touch the lives of many people?
Initially, because I was going the nonprofit route, there are a lot of barriers to scaling a nonprofit, by the way.
Mm,
This is why I see why a lot of people struggle to just start nonprofits. So what I decided to do was to create a hybrid approach. So I have Collab X, which is a concept that focuses primarily on partnering with community leaders, partners, thought leaders, professionals, other neurodivergent individuals, peers, parents, you name it. Anybody who is advancing neuro inclusion in any way, shape, or form, I want to partner and collaborate with them. One of the things that I struggled with in my journey was I did a lot of outreach, wanting to partner with people who are already doing this work. And it was quite challenging to kind of break through to those spaces. And everybody was just kind of doing their own thing. And I noticed how siloed it was. And I'm such a big picture thinker. And I'm like, no, we have to do this together. And I am a collaborator at heart. So I'm thinking about, well, how do we work together to not only support each other, but amplify the work that we're doing? How do we essentially, it's like a force multiplier concept. How do we just combine forces so that we could do more? Because I noticed and realized that as an individual, it's really hard for me to scale. And your audience and you and I are very different. I don't have a tech background at all. It's probably unique to have somebody who is a completely different sort of wiring, don't have a tech background. So my solution isn't automatically, oh, I'm going to scale this. Like what you just said, is it a web course? Yes, that might be nice to put together, but that's not my go-to. My go-to is always very human-centered. So I think about, how can I connect with people? How do I connect with individuals? How do I connect with groups of people? How do I build community? So I have a community building background too. And so that's kind of the direction that I'm going in and thinking about, how can I partner? So through my nonprofit arm, which is through Collab X, I would partner with all these different leaders and individuals who have shared values driven missions like me, to work together to, whether it's to bring awareness, whether it's to drive change, whether it's to support individual voices. I mean, you name it. I'm currently working with a neuroscientist, Dr. Selena Bartlett. I don't know if you know her. She's Australian. She's amazing. She and I are partnering together. We met a year ago, and she's actually coming to my town, and she's going to be talking about the neuroscience behind parenting and how we can parent differently through the lens of neuroscience. And she's just, she's been a neuroscientist for 30 years, and she has really just done so much to understand. She has a book called Being Seen, Master Parenting in the Digital Age. She's just phenomenal. So it's funny that I'm always working with Aussies. But anyway, she's wonderful. And so she and I are partnering together because of her work, and my work are so aligned in our mission to support parents with or without neurodivergent children, parents, period. We just started working together, and she teaches at UC Berkeley right now. And so she was going to come over to New York, and I thought, well, how do I get you in front of my parents? And so we just worked together. And so that's what I'm talking about, because Dr. Bartlett is doing this incredible work, and I want to amplify her work. I want to get her in front of people who really could benefit from her knowledge and her expertise. And so almost like a broader, bigger scale of what I was doing in my community, of bringing those experts in front of those parents. And so that's kind of how I think about scaling that piece of it. But on the other piece, it's more one-on-one coaching, small group coaching for individuals who are navigating their neurodiversity journey, as well as parents. And I do love sort of the cohort perspective, and all of this is grounded in positive intelligence. So the cohort coaching would be in small groups, because I found that when you learn from each other and when you share those lived experiences, it's so powerful, and it can actually can be extremely motivating and uplifting and encouraging, right? To see that other people are going through a shared experience as you. And then with the organizations, the neuro-inclusion consulting, I've already worked with this few nonprofit, smaller organizations, more on sort of building awareness around neurodiversity and how neurodivergence shows up, and how to sort of think about how we can be better allies to support each other, and all grounded in empathy and understanding and support. I only soft launched Neuros Spark Plus like 6 months ago, so this is very new. But I've had a voice this past year, really just going out there and sharing my story. And I have found that every time I do, it makes a difference. So I'm really grateful to be on your podcast. I was on Dr. Bartlett's podcast, so I feel like more people in Australia know me than here.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear about all the things that you're doing, and it sounds a lot more impactful than doing an e-learning course. I love the human-centered approach there. We're going to take a quick break before we continue with the rest of the episode. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a focus enhancement app for ADHDers. Staying on top of tasks is easier than ever with Focus Bear's new To-Dos feature. Record a voice note describing what you need to do, and Focus Bear's AI will turn it into a structured set of subtasks and automatically prioritize it for you. You can also take a photo of a paper to-do list, and the AI will work its magic. I'd love for you to try it. You can jump onto focusbear.io or just Google Focus Bear and try it out. Let me know what you think. All right, we're back from the break. I've had a nice stretch and keen to ask you about how do you optimize your productivity during your working hours with factoring in positive intelligence?
Well, I think a lot of us are familiar with some of those traditional ways to stay organized and productive, which is calendars, checklists, different reminders. And I think what I've realized from my experience is that's in that holistic system approach that I take. We can't just stop at the obvious things. We have to think further, and to understand truly ourselves and how our brain works. We have to understand that what works for us, what works for others may not always work for us, or it may not be enough. So for me, everything is around mindset. I can come into a focus zone and think, okay, I have to do all this work. Well, I'm already overwhelmed if I think that. So I typically start with a mindset shift and think, okay, what do I have going on? Is there a lot? How do I manage this space? How do I come into it with this mindset of, I can do this, I can tackle it, a bit by bit, or there are certain things that I don't want to focus on right now. There are some things that I can't do. And I think when you focus yourself on how your mindset is and centering that, you don't really need all the task lists, because those to me become very performative. And sometimes it can actually add stress because you're like, well, I haven't gotten through all 3 things on my list. And so for me, one of the sages that I love to access as part of PQ is activate. And so activate actually helps me think about, well, the question that I always ask is, what is needed now? And what is needed now is, I have to finish this website right now because it's due tomorrow. There might be a few other things that I could work on, but I don't need to work on it right now. So if I'm able to figure out what that thing is, I can then laser focus, and then I can just get it done. Because I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and we think about the 10 other things that you need to do. That's where time blindness sometimes comes in, and you think, oh my gosh, I have to do it all at once. Well, you don't. And so when you adopt this sort of sage perspective, you think, what do I need to do right now? And if that doesn't work, and if that's not clear, and you're like, well, there are like 3 or 4 things on my list that I need to do, and I don't know which one is a priority because I struggle with that prioritization because I'm like, everything is important. So then you just kind of explore and think, which one is most interesting for me then? Which one can I do right now that I actually want to do? And I know I'm motivated enough to do it. So you kind of work through these different stages to help you. And honestly, empathy is a huge one for me. If I come to my focus time and I'm just thinking, you know what, there's just too many things and exploring isn't helping me, activating isn't helping me, I'm just going to give myself grace. It's okay. This might be a lot and I will just walk away because sometimes that helps me a lot. Just walking away, taking a stretch, taking a breather, go outside, get some fresh air, walk around, whatever it is you need to activate your brain. Because I think for neurodivergent individuals, we need to really be able to understand what we're feeling internally. Are we in the right space to be productive today? Are we in the right space to tackle our to-do list? And I think that's really powerful. And it's something that I worked really hard to get to because I used to be such a go-getter. I'm like, nope, it's focus time. So I must get things done. And if I don't, I used to beat myself up. And now I'm like, you know what? Yes, joys of being an entrepreneur. Sorry. I know sometimes it's harder to say that at work, but I think there's still a level of choice that you have. So I think that's probably like my biggest advice on thinking about productivity. Are you in the right mindset? And how do you shift the way you think about what you're tackling versus creating that sort of internal stress?
Yeah, that's a really important point. We're not machines. It can't methodically work.
No, we're not. No, no.
All right. Well, it's been great having you on, and we're going to do a part 2 to cover some of the other territory. But to finish off, where can people connect with you if they'd like to hear more about your work?
I'm on LinkedIn, Yush Sztalkoper. I know the spelling's a little tricky, but maybe we can share the link. Also, my website should be up and running by the end of this month, neurosparkplus.com. And that's where I'm hoping to have all of the information on there around what I'm doing, how I help, how I collaborate. And there will be a learning hub, which I'm especially excited about, with free resources, lots of information, guides. My priority, first and foremost, is to educate others, is to provide resources. And all of that will be free to everybody. There will be no paywalls. Go and check that out wait until a couple of weeks, but it should have a lot of information.
Fantastic. And we'll include the link in the show notes. We'll wrap the show with that. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.